Welcome back to today's class. We have been going through the book of Hebrews, and we're in the last chapter right now. And as we're in the last chapter, we're getting all of, as I said in the last class, the practical outcomes of the sermon of Hebrews. How do we live this out? And as the author kind of shares with the church how to live this out, which he says to offer God acceptable worship, this is what acceptable worship to God looks like. We get a lot of practical examples on how to do that. And today, we're going to be talking about being content living, free from the love of money. So we read here, keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. This is such a powerful statement. We know in the pastoral letter of Timothy that Paul says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So one thing to realize here is it's not money that's the root of all evil, it's the love of money. It is idolatry. It is when we give our worship and our affection and our hope and our trust and our security in money that it actually dethrones God in our heart and causes deep idolatry. When Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says that you cannot serve two masters, and he gives an example, he doesn't say you can't serve Satan and God. That's very obvious. But he says you cannot serve mammon and God or money and God. Mammon was the god of money. And we take away from that, and as you meditate on that, you realize that money falsely offers everything that God offers. Money falsely offers a hope for your future, right? If I get money or I have enough money, then I'll have a better life. Money falsely offers you security. If I have money, then I'm set, I'm good, I have nothing to worry about. Money offers us a false sense of freedom and independence, right? You hear this over and over again in our culture, that why do you want money? Because I want to be independent, I want to be free, I want to be able to do what I want. Money falsely offers us all these things that God offers us: hope, freedom, security, a future, all of that. And so because of that, it is very easy to fall into the trap of serving the wrong master, loving money instead of loving God. And so the call to the hearer here is to not fall into this trap where we love money, but to be content with what we have. And what's really interesting about juxtaposing that with being content is because it's not necessarily having too much money that is being called out here, but it is the desire of having more. We understand this very well in our culture because we have become increasingly materialistic. And so we may not even have a lot of money, but we have still fallen into the trap of the love of money and the idolatry of money because we aren't content with what we have. And a lot of times this plays out in our prayers and how we understand God. There's this false gospel called the prosperity gospel that teaches that the blessing of God is only viewed through the lens of money. And so I only am generous to God in order to get more wealth. I only pray in order that God gives to me. And I am doing bad or I am not blessed if, let's say, I don't get more promotions or I'm not a millionaire. And it views the most mature Christians in the kingdom as the most wealthy Christians in the kingdom. This is so far from the truth, especially you have to look no further than the New Testament, where Paul did not have a lot of money. He was constantly in prison. The disciples were uneducated. Paul says that the apostles were a mockery to the world, that they could have done so many other things with their life, but instead they were poor, they looked terrible, they dressed terrible, like they had the lowest of the low things, but yet he was rich in God. And it completely debunks this idea that material wealth is equal to spiritual maturity. Now, can you have material wealth and still be spiritual mature? Yes, but you can also be materially poor and spiritually mature. Those things are not correlated in the kingdom of God. And when the author speaks about us being content, again, he's not necessarily speaking about what we have today, but what we hope in having for tomorrow. Because when I am not content, I want more. I want more money. I want more things. I want more possessions. I want higher, better resume, better titles, more promotions. And so when I am not content with what I have today, then I am not content in God. And we see that in the next saying. And it reveals the idolatry and the love of our heart. And we understand that our contentedness should not be in how much money that we have or in the hope for how much money we have. It should only be in God because of what it says here, that God has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. That's such a powerful statement. And it should bring us a sense of satisfaction in life, because the only thing we truly need in life is God. And if you and I have God, there's no amount of money that can satisfy us the way that God does. And there's no amount of money that can purchase what God gives us. It is the ultimate free gift. And so if we have God, I may not have my health, I may not have my prosperity, I may not have that job position I want, I may not have the savings I want, I may not have the paycheck I want, but ultimately in God I have all that I need, and everything else is second tier in my life. Everything else is not as important as long as I have God. That's why you can take my money, you can take my possessions, you can take my house, you can take my health, you can beat me, you can cause me suffering, you can cause me pain, but you cannot take my faith. In Revelation, it says that no one can snatch us out of the hand of God, meaning the devil, as he messed with Job, messed with his health, messed with his finances, messed with his family, all of these different things, but he could not rob Job's faith in God. And Job wrestled with God throughout all of that. It was hard. It was painful. There was a lot of suffering involved. But the discipline of the Lord, as we read in Hebrews chapter 13, produced righteousness in him. And as this church was going through deep suffering, they were losing or about to lose their material possessions. They had to be content in God alone. And this promise, I will never leave you or forsake you, is an incredible promise to live into and to dig into, to know that God is with us. No matter what my circumstances, no matter what my financial circumstance looks like, I am content. I am content. I know that in Matthew, Jesus says that he clothes the lilies of the field, he feeds the birds of the air. If those are taken care of, how much more will he take care of his children? He promises us shelter, food, and clothing. All of those three things, God says he will supply for us. And as long as we keep our eyes on the kingdom, all these things will be given to us. So he will take care of us. And I can say as a testimonial to God that in every time of hardship, when I thought I wouldn't have enough, that money wasn't going to come in, that I wasn't going to be able to provide shelter, food, and clothing for me and my family, God has always provided more than enough for me. And my job is not the provision. My job is not any of that. My job is to keep faithfulness, as we learned in Hebrews chapter 11, in God, and be content with what he has given me in my hands, to steward that well, and to not covet or jealously long for a future where I have more. I just enjoy and I'm thankful for what God has given me, and I steward it to the best of my capacity. And we are given another encouragement, so we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do to me? Now you got to remember again, the situation that the Hebrews were in, that they were on the verge of deep persecution and probably martyrdom. And so this promise, and it really goes hand in hand with money, and we have to understand this, because so often we compartmentalize how we spend and use our money and think about our money and our spirituality. But it is all intertwined with each other. So when he says we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear what can man do to me. And he's relating that to being content and not having the love of money. Is because when this house church was confronted with martyrdom and suffering for the gospel, it is really a choice of, am I faithful to God or am I faithful to my comfortability? They are threatening to take my possessions. They are threatening to harm me physically. They are threatening to take away my home and the things that I built over time. And when they do that, we are at a crossroads with what is more important, the comforts and the materialistic things, or the love of money for this world, or my faithfulness to God. And so the encouragement that we are left with here is, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? And so when they are being faced with martyrdom, that is a liturgy that they can remind themselves of. The Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? We have to remember that verse that Jesus says, there is one who can kill the body, but who should we fear? The one who can kill the body, or the one who has control over the soul, right? If you can do whatever you want to me physically, you can do whatever you want to me materialistically, you can do whatever you want to my body, but ultimately I trust in the one who cares for my soul, for my eternal security, for my eternal well-being, for my eternal inheritance. And so in that, I can confidently say, what can man do to me? You can only take away from me physically, but you cannot take away from me eternally, which is what matters in the grand scheme of things. It's playing that long game. And when we get too caught up in the short game, we get too caught up in material possessions and wealth and money and jealousy and coveting and all of these other things, we fall down the bad path that the Hebrew church was falling into, and we fall into idolatry, and our worship is misplaced. So as long as we continue to worship, then in the light of every situation, we can rejoice and say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? I hope that is an encouragement with you, because it is very anti the message we are given today in the world. And I cannot just continue to emphasize how timely the book of Hebrews is for the body today. They were faced with way more persecution, struggle, pain, and suffering than we were, but I think we have grown way more used to being comfortable than they had been. And so it almost feels as dramatic to us as it would have to them to be faced with suffering, loss, and still remain faithful to the God who maybe allowed it or used it to discipline us because he loves us and cause holiness and righteousness in us. And to think that, and to not give in to the root of bitterness, but stay grateful and thankful for all that God has done. And it is such a mind twist and anti everything that we are taught. And that's why I'm so convinced that we need this message so much more today, because Hebrews gives us a whole nother way of viewing the world and looking at life that will leave us healthier, that will cause us joy, that will give us eternal security, and really will allow us to live a life of satisfaction in Christ, no matter what happens to us around the world. And that is really needed today. So I'm glad you joined today, and looking forward to continuing to look at how to offer God acceptable worship in the days to come.